Welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. This week, I'm excited to be having a returning guest. Ted Page is joining us to talk about his book that is coming out in September called Good Grandpa. Now, some of you may remember Ted from a previous conversation that we had talking about his blog, Good Grandpa, why he started this blog, what he's trying to achieve with spreading the news that grandpas are actually important, that they're fun, that they're a positive force in the family unit. Well, in this book that Ted has spent well over a year writing and researching, he's dived into some of the wisdom of other grandfathers, such as Tom Brokaw, John Cleese, even reached out to the Dalai Lama, and he's talked to a number of other people. A couple of the people that he's reached out to and talked about that are in the book are also Ralph Jodas, a retired general from the Air Force, and James Lott Jr. So I'm going to put links to Ted's previous conversation with me talking about the Good Grandpa blog. I'm going to put the link to Ralph and James into the show notes as well so that we get an opportunity to listen to all of those. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump in and let the conversation go. But please remember at the end of this, go out, find the book, Good Grandpa, and put your pre order in for this amazing book that's full of great stories and wisdoms about grandfathers. Hi, Ted. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm happy to have you back on again.
Greg, it's wonderful to be back, and it's been a fascinating journey over the past couple years, and it's great to reconnect.
Oh, absolutely. And for folks that, so that you know, I've interviewed Ted and we've been connected for probably a good 2 or 3 years at this point. And there's an episode that I did with Ted that focused in on his project, Good Grandpa, and the blog. And kind of also, we talked about kind of our mutual projects on that episode, if I remember right.
Yeah, mutual projects, and we have a similar kind of origin story, I think. Different types of media. I recall that you remember looking around for the grandpa world and see what was out there, and all you could find was the movie Bad Grandpa. And you thought, gee, where are the good ones? And I thought, wow, that's exactly what I went through. Where are the good grandpas? Because I had a wonderful grandfather in my life. And it's like, the only thing I could see in popular culture was the drunk, senile skirt chaser. So, yeah, just trying to dive into the experience, find the good grandpas out there, and be the best one that I can.
Oh, absolutely. And, as this podcast is coming out, we've got the book now, Good Grandpa. And what I want to do is dive in and start to ask you by what inspired you to go down the pathway of writing the Good Grandpa book when you had the Good Grandpa blog.
What happened with the blog, which was really fun, fascinating experience, was over time, more and more grandfathers reached out to me on the blog, and some of them offered up, their stories and experiences. And I just started, just listening as much as I could and published some things that they shared with me. And the more I learned about the larger experience of other grandfathers, the more I thought, there's so much more here and way beyond my own experiences. And, just gradually built up an audience of readers and more guys, stepping up and being active grandfathers, each in their own way and to their own abilities. And it was about a year and a half ago, the New York Times reached out for a story on how to be a better grandfather. So I thought, well, I'm still learning that, but I'm happy to weigh in if I can. And I just had a flood of more people reaching out, including an email from a literary agent in New York who said, hey, I think this could be a book. And I had just started to think about that. So it was a bit of serendipity that the story came out and this agent reached out to me. And I just said, let's give it a shot. Let's go. I have nothing to lose. I've got some stories here. And, it took about 6 months and a lot of hard work to put together a book proposal and, a lot of rejection, which I'm grateful to my agent for not sharing each one with me. But eventually said, hey, I think we got one here. And they're called Regalo Press. And the woman who runs the press, Gretchen Young, she founded it and she wanted a more philanthropic business model. So she makes a donation to the nonprofit of the author's choice. And that really fit my approach with the book. I wanted to find ways to nurture the next great generation, our grandkids. So I signed on, and a year later, I had the manuscript. So it was quite a year, I will tell you, quite a year. But that was the origin of it, and it's coming out in September. Official launch in time for Grandparents' Day, and pre-orders are open now for those who want to be previous. But it's just been a real journey for me, and just really delightful.
Well, and I appreciated that you shared copies with me ahead of time, and I read them. And as we were having our pre-recording conversation, folks, I held up and I've got tabs and I've got highlights and everything through this because one of the things that jumped out at me after reading several different grandfather books, which were they're all great in their own way, is you combined a little bit of biography, you combined a little bit of just storytelling from other grandfathers, and then you also had your own reflections in there. And it was a nice blend of that. And did you have that intention going in when you're writing this, or did you have some other kind of idea in your head and it just morphed into here?
It was a combination of things. First, for me, I viewed it as entertainment. It's not a how-to book. I had publishers, big publishers, who talk with me, who were pushing me to have more of a classic how-to book, including right at the end of the book, a chapter rather. Here are the 5 takeaways for how you can make an influence. And I thought, gee, I really don't want to do that. I wanted something that was more of almost like an adventure story where the reader comes with me on my own learning journey. And I wanted the reader to discover things along the way with me and to draw their own conclusions. So I would share my thoughts, but I would open it up so that the reader was very much part of their own kind of learning process. So over a 10-year period of writing the blog, I had some stories that had gotten the best response. So those are like my greatest hits. Not that they were great hits, but they were, they got more readers than others.
Right.
And as part of that process, I then set out to add to the stories that were shared with me by other grandfathers by interviewing as many different grandfathers from different walks of life as I could. So my personal anecdotes and family stories of being a grandfather and stories about my grandfather and my father and others in my family, like my Aunt Lois, who was a huge influence on all this. That was a springboard into the stories of others, and I grouped them together into chapters on different topics. So, for example, one topic was on, this is that grandfatherhood is not always a bed of roses, right? There's a lot of joy, a tremendous amount of joy in the experience, but I recounted an experience I had with one of my grandkids got horribly sick with RSV, was in the hospital. And, I prayed for him and, he was on oxygen. And, so I tell the story of that, which is obviously very emotional and very dramatic. And he got better, thank God. But I thought, what are the experiences of other grandfathers? And I happened to be introduced to a fellow named Eric Bear, who related his experience, which added a whole nother layer of that idea of like, grandfatherhood is a joy, grandparenthood in general is a joy, but as you have more children, in our case grandchildren, added into our world, the more we have this circle of people that we care so deeply about. And sometimes things don't go well. And this guy, Eric Bear, his youngest granddaughter developed an incurable brain tumor. And And the doctor said, look, the best we can do is, do a surgery. We can't cure it, but maybe we can keep her alive long enough so that there'll be a cure in the future. So they went ahead with the surgery. They got out most of the tumor, but not all of it, as they've said. This guy, he and his wife, who was a minister, started taking classes in healing energy. And his wife was an ordained minister, and she started a prayer group. And the prayer group grew wider and wider for this little girl. Her name is Molly. And they went back in for the post-surgical, appointment some months later, and the doctors were absolutely astonished. They had said, we don't know how this happened, but your granddaughter's in remission. So for me, that was just this layer of depth on top of this that I couldn't have done on my own. It wasn't anything my personal experience, but that formed this chapter about healing energy and the power of prayer. And there were all kinds of experiences like that in this book. Talking to veterans, for example, talking to Tom Brokaw, a legendary newsman, John Cleese, my personal comedy god,
Yes.
Reggie Williams, a former NFL pro athlete. I spoke with leaders of all the major world's religions. I spoke with grandfathers who had served for each branch of the military, and Chinese, Indians, tried to really get the gambit. And that was the eye opener. And that was sort of the basis of the structure. My personal experiences combined with others in a format that was storytelling to bring the reader along with me.
I loved it. Early on, when I think you were moving forward with the book and you were reaching out and sharing some of this, like, hey, Greg, who do you know that meets these criteria, and how you synthesized everything? It reminded me a little bit of one of the leadership conferences I had here in Atlanta, where Desmond Tutu was talking, and him and Jimmy Carter and some other people had put together this group called the Elders, right? And they were senior statesmen, leaders, but they all had these different backgrounds. And the initial focus was, how do we capture the story of these elders? How do we capture some of the life lessons? And then how do we make that shareable to other people, to get them involved, to get other elders at that point? But essentially, it was like, how do we get everybody together? The way you approached it, where, hey, I want to reach out to all these different people. It wasn't just, I want to reach out to Fortune 50 CEOs and CIOs and C-suite people. I don't want to just reach out to this one group. Just really hit home about how diversified our experiences are, but then also how similar our experiences are.
There are tremendous range of similarities among people, and kind of through the diversity, I found commonalities. And it was through talking to people who, on the face of it, I wouldn't have thought initially that I had that much in common with them beyond the fact that they were grandfathers. But I continued to find surprising things that resonated, and all in different ways. But yeah, there was the celebrities, like Tom Brokaw, who wrote The Greatest Generation, right? That was the reason why I wanted to get in touch with him, because I wanted to figure out how our grandkids could be the new great generation. So I went right to the source of that. He had some great insights. But yeah, it was what kind of emerged, a number of things. But this is the greatest club in the world, and it's so exclusive you can't buy it. If you are very, very lucky and the stars align, and you have a healthy family and your kids are doing well, then the generation continues, and that's what we all have in common. And I'll also point out that I never asked anyone who they voted for. I don't care. I don't care. We are all of the party of being good grandfathers, the best of our abilities, and there was some turning points along the way that made me think about my own experience in different ways, but also think about this country in different ways as we're going through a period that's so divisive.
Yeah, it's crazy, I think, when try to balance out the negativity that we might see in social media, popular media, what have you, And then if you're in the supermarket together and you see another grandfather with a grandchild and they're having a great time, or maybe there's a struggle or something, about that could be anybody. That could, and it doesn't matter what political beliefs and what those things are. It's a grandfather with a grandchild running an errand. And that's a good thing, having that connection point. And, I think one of the things we sometimes lose is this idea that, hey, the grandfathers are important for more than just checks and signing birthday cards, that there's a presence, there's an energy, there's a quiet stillness sometimes, and sometimes not so quiet stillness that comes up. Uh, that the kids need just to help become good people.
Very much. And that came out through so many conversations across a spectrum, everything from Muslim imam to Episcopalian priest, a couple rabbis. My friend Fred Schock is a rower by trade, and he ran the head of the Charles Regatta in Boston for about 20 years and helped grow it to be a big organization. He's got 5 grandkids now. His father was one of the boys in the boat, right? So his father was at the Berlin Olympics, and he was an alternate actually on the rowing team. And that team brought home the gold medal. And, but he, when I asked him, like, what's the most important thing? Because that was something I asked of all the grandfathers. What is the number one wisdom that you want to share with the next generation out of your whole life? If you could picture yourself asking a question or talking to your grandkids 20 years from now, whether you're here or not, like, what do you want them to know most? He really thought about it. All the grandfathers thought about it. But what Fred said was, I want to instill in them the basic building blocks of what it is to be a good human being, right? And that, I thought, was a very profound idea. And what I found was that a central ingredient of that was, just showing up, just being there. And you and I and millions of other grandfathers in the United States and around the world, knock on wood, we are living longer than any previous generation of grandfathers. We're here longer, and that means we can have more of an impact, more time together, and we have more chance to not only have fun and experience the joy of all this, but also to instill those basic building blocks of what it means to be a good person.
Oh, sure. Well, and one of the stories I'd love for you to share with us is how you connected with the Dalai Lama, what his response was, and then your, I guess, exploration of his response to you.
I got such a kick out of the fact that my Aunt Lois, who passed away a few years ago, I asked her how I could be a good grandpa, and she said, be there for them. Just be there for them. And she got me started on this journey. And she would get such a kick out of the fact that she's in the same book as the Dalai Lama. I basically say, that's just ridiculous. Why would you have me with the Dalai Lama? But they both have their own kind of wisdom. What happened with His Holiness, he's known as, is I set out to talk to leaders of all the world's major religions. So that entailed, just reaching through my friend group, friends and family, connected with Father Craig Burlington, who was an Episcopalian priest, who shared his life story and his wisdom. And then I spoke with a Muslim imam down in Florida, who was wonderful and shared his stories and his central wisdom. Spoke with a Reform rabbi and a Orthodox rabbi. But before I had spoken to any of these guys, I had sent a letter. This was like January of last year. I'd sent a letter to the Dalai Lama at his address in India. And this is where the internet comes in really handy, right? Go to ChatGPT and enter, how do I write a letter? How do I contact the Dalai Lama, right? So here again, this is something that didn't exist for my parents' generation. I can just sit at my computer. How do I get in touch with the Dalai Lama? So lo and behold, there's an address in India for the Dalai Lama. So I wrote a letter and said, look, I'm gathering the world's wisdom, the world's grandfathers. You're, a spiritual grandfather for humanity. I'd love to ask you for some time to talk about what advice you might have that we can help nurture the new generation. Didn't hear back. Months go by. Literally 7 months later, this is the day after I'd spoken to the rabbis, which is the last group of religious leaders. I thought, you know what? Maybe I gave up on the Dalai Lama too easily. And it turns out within a day of my thinking that, I get an email from the personal secretary for the Dalai Lama. His name is Tenzin Takla, saying, sorry, getting back to you late on this, but His Holiness is focusing on his meditation practices and I'm not able to have an audience with you. But best of luck with your project. So here I have this email from the personal secretary. I thought, worth a shot. I email Tenzin and say, totally understand, I respect that Dalai Lama is focusing on his personal practice, but can you just ask him for his number one wisdom that can help us nurture the next great generation of humanity? I got a response the very next day, and his response was, compassion is the key to the future well-being of the planet and humanity. Compassion. So that made me want to dig a little deeper also into the Buddhist interpretation of compassion. And it's, as the Dalai Lama talks about it, it's not just being compassionate. It's not just prayers, hopes, and wishes for compassion. It's active compassion. So going out and actually doing something to relieve the suffering of others. So the Dalai Lama's active compassion is based on taking real action to make a difference. And that put all of the wisdom shared by the different faiths, from Christianity and Judaism and Muslim faiths, into sharp focus and thinking about the action that we can take as grandparents to make a difference in the lives of these kids. And that's partly how I come up with, or rediscovered, however you want to call it, thinking about wisdom as an heirloom that is meant to be used. We can use this wisdom, and if we're around long enough, we can use it in very productive ways, and we can share it just by our presence and doing the things that we love to do anyway. Whatever crafts, whatever activities, could be fishing, golf, doesn't matter. Through our presence, we can, over time, instill that wisdom that came down from generations before us. And the longer we're here and the more we can be with them, the more we can have an impact to change their lives.
Oh, I love that. I love especially the idea that wisdom is action and not passive. Same thing with the compassion, right? I think sometimes we think compassion equals empathy, equals more of a passive kind of connection. But if you're actively looking to solve somebody's issues, if you're actively looking for ways to share your wisdom, if you're actively looking to be engaged as a grandfather, all these things can be small, actions, or they can be large actions. But being active is part of this role that we get to have as being grandfathers.
Being active and making a difference just go hand in hand. And I say this as someone who, a lot of my grandkids call me the tickle monster because it is one of my skills. Apparently, I'm particularly good at finding the best way to tickle these kids, and we have great fun chasing around and doing all those fun things that grandparents do. But there's also, there's those moments, and there's a time of understanding for them. And that was something I heard again and again and again from grandfathers, is there's always that time where, there was one grandfather I talked with who knew that one of his granddaughters had stolen a pen from her sister's favorite pen, right? Now, she was 5 years old. Now, she was 1 or 2 would be one thing, but 5, starting to be at that age where she should know right from wrong, pulled her aside and he said, I'm your grandfather. I'm always going to love you, but you need to understand what you did was wrong. And I want you to go and apologize to your sister. And I never want you to lie to me again. Right? And we all have those moments, right? And we have those moments. I have memories of things like that with my own grandfather, and I have memories of my father instilling that sort of wisdom. And it's a great gift to have someone in your life who can actually help you understand right from wrong. And I think it's such a huge challenge for kids these days, for young people, like to find that moral balance, to find a compass in life, and to take action every day to follow that moral compass so that they can do the right thing for others. And sometimes it is those big things. Sometimes it's the small things. In the book, I talk about Reggie Williams, NFL pro, played about, I don't know, 12 or 14 seasons for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was, he happened to be African American, and his family had escaped from Jim Crow, Alabama, I think, and settled in Detroit. And he had struggled to get a academic or a sports scholarship for football in college. Couldn't get one. Never got an athletic scholarship to college, but he did get into Dartmouth, and he got onto the football team at Dartmouth. First week of that team, he was in the men's locker room, and two white guys walked out of the locker room. They would not share a locker room with a black man. The coach of the Dartmouth team made Reggie the captain of the team that day. It says, "Welcome in. You are the captain." And he rose to the occasion. He became an all-star. He goes on to the NFL, plays with the Bengals, played in 2 Super Bowls. And he said, all that discrimination my family experienced when I was growing up and that I experienced initially at Dartmouth, my dad said, that's your fuel. You got to harness that. And that's what helps you run faster. They'll help you catch the ball. That's what's going to help you be the star athlete and do the right thing in your life. So I said, Reggie, what is something in your life on the playing field, in a Super Bowl championship, where you used that fuel to win? And you really had to think about it. But he said, I'll tell you, the day I used that fuel, I was not on the playing field. I volunteered to be a city councilman in the city of Cincinnati. And he became friends with Arthur Ashe, who was active in the anti-apartheid movement. Arthur Ashe, tennis player. And Reggie led the effort for the Cincinnati City Council, pushed the city to divest from the South African apartheid regime. Reggie didn't know till later that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because all kinds of city municipalities in the United States and around the world started divesting from the apartheid regime. He gets a call out of the blue from Desmond Tutu, who you mentioned. Says, is this Reggie Williams? Says, yes, it is. Well, I'm Desmond Tutu. I want to come to Cincinnati, and I want to personally thank you for your efforts and the work you did, because you helped bring down apartheid, right?
Wow.
That was the fuel. Now imagine being Reggie Williams' grandchild, right? The wisdom that someone like that can instill, and to have that kind of love. And when I asked Reggie for his number one wisdom for our kids, it was be nice to people, fight for a kinder world, right? And to have that history. And this, by the way, is I've been told by Reggie that an excerpt from Good Grandpa that tells his story is now going to be part of the official history of South Africa. It's going to be on the website that chronicles the history of South Africa. So this is how kindness reverberates through the generations, right? It's how it spreads. And hatred can spread, but kindness also spreads. And I believe it's far more powerful than the hatred. So people like Reggie, like that's what gives me inspiration.
That's awesome. Just real quick for folks that may not know, a lot of the states and municipalities with some of their different organizations, whether it's teachers unions or whatever, some of their pensions, some of these things look for investment opportunities. And so they might buy bonds, they might buy different debt instruments to make money to fund those things. And some of that is going to be overseas. They might buy a Johannesburg municipal bond, for example, that they're going to make some interest in and help support the pensions. So by doing this, it's a huge thing of taking your money and going somewhere else where your values align more with what your goals are with that money. So sorry, some folks may not know or understand that, how some of those things work and why divesting of those debt instruments and investments and things is such a big deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Apparently that was what made the difference. It's like, how did they finally stop Al Capone? They got him for tax evasion.
Right. Right. What's that old saying? It's all about the money, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
So after you've put this book together and even as you were doing this, how has this project affected you in your outlook and your actions as a grandfather yourself?
One of the key turning points in the book was my interview with veterans, including a combat veteran named Bob Storanowitz, who told a very moving story about his experience in Vietnam. And I was really deeply moved by the stories of the veterans, all of whom at one point in their life did something to support orphans and performed not only their military duties, but just extraordinary acts of kindness and generosity as veterans, not just when they served, but in the years after. And a common theme was that you never stop serving. So you're part of this community of veterans and you find a way to make your community part of your family and extend that love that you have for your family out into the community and perform acts of service. And I thought, wow, I really have not done that. I was a very active dad. I was, ferrying the kids to this practice and that practice and did everything I could to help them have a good education and, get into the right colleges and pay for college and all that fun stuff, be as supportive as I can. But I haven't volunteered, for community groups. I haven't gotten involved in the church and so forth. And, you know, what I heard loud and clear from these men was you got to lead by example, right? It's one thing to tell other people what to do. So, first of all, I'm not telling anyone how to be a good grandpa. I am learning, I am aspiring to be better, and I am not there yet. Certainly by the standard of the guys that I spoke with, I have a lot to learn. But one of the key things for me, as a learning point is that I set out with the book to figure out how I could change the next generation. How could I change the lives of, my grandchildren so they had a shot at being the next great generation, to rise and to have their best lives possible. And what I found was that I was the one who needed to change. So every single day I'm thinking, what can I do? And I have not joined yet a community organization. I have offered to do readings for veterans groups, that kind of thing, and I hope to do that shortly. But I'm starting with just the simplest things. Like, how often in any given week does someone say to you, to any of us, that was really kind of you? That was really thoughtful of you, right? Because kindness is one of the number one things that grandfather's told me. It says, you got to be kind. You got to be nice to people. What am I doing? So I'll give you just a dumb example of like an everyday thing, not a monumental thing, not ending apartheid, but just small things. Like we have a cottage up in Vermont, and hired a plumber to, help get the water on, which is always a trick, because the water pumps out of the lake and it's hard to get it prime and all these things. And so these two guys are working on the pump house for hours and hours and hours. Noon runs around and my wife was getting me a sandwich because I was down there helping them. She was going down to the general store, and so I just go to the two guys and I say, "Listen, would you like us to get you a sandwich? Because we're going to get one anyway, and happy to do it for you." And it was just this look on their face, like this person's actually being nice to us. Yeah, be nice to the plumbers who are there, sweating and trying to figure out how to get your pump going in your cottage or what have you. It's like little things like that, where people are just surprised that you're going to be nice to them. It's like one guy I talked with, Jack Moore, who was a former banker with State Street, and said, you got to exceed the golden rule. It's a dog eat dog world. So it's not just a question of how do you do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It's like do unto others every single day in ways that are better than you anticipate them doing unto you. You've got to go beyond. So that's like my new living mantra. How do I go beyond the golden rule? And every single day, have compassion for people, even if I don't agree with them on things, politics in particular. They have their viewpoints, have respect. These are basic fundamental things, right? But we
Right.
forget about it. And I think a lot of young people are just looking for, like, how do I live? And they're just looking at Instagram or Facebook, which is, what do you call them? Influencers?
Influencers, yeah.
Influencers. They're like 20-year-old influencers and they're selling this luxury handbag or that or this musical group or whatever. It's like, we need people our age to be positive influencers with wisdom that can actually help you live a better life, right? Like, and I'm still learning. I'm 66 this summer and I got a lot to learn. But that's exciting, right? It's exciting to find out, to have some kind of pathway. My goal with the book, with the Good Grandpa book, is not just that this could be something nice to give to a grandfather in someone's life or a grandmother, but like, I want people who are 20 years old to read this because so many grandfathers said to me, I'm going to tell you something, Ted, that I wish I knew 40 years ago. So that's the headline. Everyone who's in their 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, 18, learn the things that the grandfathers wish they knew when they were your age.
Oh, I love that. And in your book at the end, you've got a letter that you wrote to yourself. I think when you were 26 or something, and you'd put it away, and then through this project rediscovered it.
Yes, I wrote, Dear 26-year-old us. My wife and I found a photo of ourselves that we thought was lost, and it was us on our honeymoon in London when we were 26 years old. This is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth in the 1980s. And I thought, wow, look at this handsome couple. And there is a tradition called the Forever Letter, which I write about, which is grandfathers or grandmothers writing letters to future generations meant to be opened in the future. I thought maybe this is an opportunity to turn it around. Like, what would I tell that 26-year-old me, right? And there are a lot of things that I learned in the course of being a dad and now as being a grandparent that I could say, advice to us as we're starting our lives. And I think that's super important for young people to hear. And for those of us who are grandfathers to understand, that there's things that we could share with young people like that.
Oh yeah, I thought that was pretty powerful the way to wrap that up and talk about like, hey, you're going to have to put effort into that relationship. You're going to have to get the babysitter to go do date nights. Not everything's going to be happy endings. Not everything's going to be perfect, but you've got to continue to invest and work at that relationship because here's the payoff down the road for putting up with burnt food and bad birthdays and whatever when you're 30, right? Is like you put up with this and you work through some of these challenges and these different areas where people grow at different rates maybe or different interests change. So you want to get to a point where you are grandma and grandpa going to somebody's birthday party and you are doing these things. And so, yeah, I thought that was powerful.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to kind of wrap it up that way in the book, so it had that uplifting message and feeling to it. But I do think there's a lot to be said for living longer and having perspective. And when you're in the middle of it and it's 2 a.m. and your kid is coughing or, you know, vomiting and they brought home the latest whatever from school or a million other things, right? That are really hard. It's hard. And one of the common threads that I did hear from grandfathers was, you know what? You're going to get through it. You're going to have some tough parts in your life. Tom Brokaw said is you're going to have challenges. Some of them are going to be really hard challenges, but what do you learn from it? And what you learn is going to help you carry on and have a better life. And that was, if there were two things I heard more than anything else from grandfathers when I asked for the number one wisdom, one was some variation of be kind, be nice, just simply be nice to people. And the other one is, you're going to be okay. You're tougher than you think. You're going to survive. And it's funny, it wasn't until I had finished the book, and I talked to John Cleese from Monty Python, and I talked to, or interviewed Tom Brokaw and all these other guys, and heard, all of their stories, that the idea of having a toughness or resilience, strength to live, and being kind, you cannot separate those two things. Because you can be the physically strongest person in the world. You can get 800s on your SATs. You can excel in a million ways. But without kindness, you have nothing. Because the toughest, strongest people are going to run into hard times. No matter what, you're going to have a hard time. And it may be completely out of control. Family member gets sick. You get sick. Family tragedies. Things happen in life. But when you have friends and you're nice to people, they're the ones who come and help when the chips are down. And I think it matters so much for us, for the kids, and I think there's lessons for our nation at large. How do we behave with each other? How do we behave in the world? Because we can be a superpower, but without friends, we're nothing.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the top things now that I'm working with children more regular basis is working with them to understand they need to be building allies, and they do that through being kind, manners, the old saying about, I think, what is it, manners is the grease of society or something like that. Probably have that wrong, but you can't go about life just thinking it's about you. And when you're younger, everything is about you. I mean, that's part of being younger, but it's a grandfather, it's an older man or woman coming alongside you saying, hey, you know what? You need to hold the door open for that person. You need to help your buddy out. You need to do some of these things just to make their lives a little bit better. And to your point, the golden rule, have that idea of the golden rule is the minimum, not the maximum. It's the minimum of getting by in the world.
That's right. Truer words have never been spoken. And I can tell you, as someone who was raised Unitarian, which these days I say I'm a non-practicing Unitarian, which most people would say is redundant. But Unitarian is, it's known, for those who don't know, it's like one of the more liberal branches of Protestantism. So we kind of embrace all religions, in our own way, and we find that universality between, these beliefs. But I'll tell you, through talking to, you can't talk to several rabbis, an imam, and a priest without being changed, especially if you do it over a 2-week period. Or talk to someone, as I said, who formed a prayer group to help save the life of his granddaughter. It's like I just became a more spiritual person in the course of these conversations. So that's another thing that I found has changed my life is, getting to know God a little bit better, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And I would think too, also understanding how maybe we're used by God to help in some of these circumstances. The word, the hands, the instruments, that sort of thing. And when we are active in doing that, that's great. Things can happen. And if we don't, then maybe things don't happen. Just a thought, if we're getting a little deep here.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It is a deep place. In the Bible, they say the kingdom of heaven is within. And to the extent I've been lucky, I've in that deep river, maybe I've, had a toe in the water on occasion, still striving to get there. But I think there is a commonality to that that's spread all across religions. I heard it loud and clear from the imam which is a really mind-opening experience, talking to an imam for a while, and an Orthodox rabbi who met his wife in the same neighborhood I did in Brooklyn, Crown Heights, Brooklyn. So that was one of the things that led to, my number one takeaway was, or my own, advice for the next generation, if you will, wisdom, was find a reason to go talk with people, especially if you think you have nothing in common with them, right? And I think, that's when you find out that oh, when I talked to the imam, I've never had conversation like that with someone who was Muslim. And here I talked to a leader of the Muslim community. One thing we had in common was that generally when I'm around my grandkids that are here for a sleepover or whatever, or just when they're around in the morning, I will give them a little piece of chocolate. Before breakfast, by the way. It's not a full plate of chocolate. It's a treat.
Right.
And at first they were just startled by this. Who is, what? You giving me chocolate for breakfast? And the imam did the same thing. The Muslim imam did the same thing. And a Chinese grandfather I spoke with used to carry around a fanny pack with all kinds of candy in it. And he just doles it out whenever he wants to. Like, I never knew I had this in common with people and the Muslim imam. And, for me, it was just like saying life is sweet. Life, doesn't last forever. And
Right.
it's a way of saying I love you.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, Ted, I've had you on for a little bit. Where can people find the book again? And we'll be putting links into the show notes. Where can they find your blog and everything that you're doing?
Well, the blog is goodgrandpa.com. One can find it just a simple Google search. If you go grandfather blog, it comes up. The book is being distributed by Simon & Schuster, officially launching beginning of September for Grandparents' Day. But it's available for pre-order on all the major book buying sites like Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I think you bought online on the Simon & Schuster website. Any place online typically that sells books. Just do a search for Good Grandpa by Ted Page and that'll come up. It won't ship until September. But, if someone gets their order in, then at least there'll be a better chance of getting a first edition. I think there's a fair amount of interest in it, but as I was saying a little bit before, we started recording, this was just a total labor of love for me. And, I always figured if it sold more copies than in my immediate family, and that maybe that'd be just fine with me. But I did it so I could have something that maybe would make a difference and help people in their lives. I hope it does that, but it is available to at least pre-order. And lastly, I just want to mention that I would love to hear from people. I love hearing other people's stories because I don't have all the answers and never will. I learned so much from talking to other grandfathers and hearing their stories, very moving stories, some of them really funny stories, including my friend John Cleese, who's always cracks me up, as he should. But I love people to reach out to me. There's a contact form on the Good Grandpa blog. And if you have a story, let me know. Let's talk. This is a community, right? And you've done a great job of this, Greg, with your podcast of just having a community of grandfathers. And hats off to you. And I so appreciate all the help you've given me in introducing me to people. I've gotten used to saying the words, I cannot thank you enough. So I will tell that to Greg Payne right now. I cannot thank you enough, Greg.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I mean, I think when we bump into people in this grandfather space, when we have a passion for trying to influence the next greatest generation, I think it just makes sense for us all to get each other's phone numbers and emails and get connected and support each other the best we can.
Amen to that. Amen.
All right. And I think anything else about being a grandfather that we haven't talked about or that you wanted to bring up before we sign off?
I will tell you what John Cleese told me when I mentioned I was writing this book and looking for the number one wisdom. This is, of course, the minister of silly walks, who the only person in the world who's ever made me laugh so hard I was in pain. And when he talked about the number one wisdom that he wanted to share for the next generation, he was totally serious. And he said, "It is better to find the answer than to know the answer." And what he means is that if we have absolute certainty that we know something, then we stop searching, we stop learning. And, for example, everyone accepted Newtonian physics as the law. Like that was it for hundreds of years. Like that was the end. That was the beginning and the end. And then along came Einstein and upended everything, the theory of relativity. And then within Einstein's lifetime, there was particle physics, which upended even his beliefs. So it's the journey that matters, right? So as a Python fan, my interpretation of that, which I think is fair, is that the quest for truth is the quest for the Holy Grail. So I am just an old man running through the forest, banging two coconuts together on a quest for truth. And like that never stops. It's like we're just going to keep going here and, into the forest, and maybe I'll get to Camelot someday.
Oh, I love that. Or maybe we'll sit down and have a proper argument.
Well, we'll have to find out if it's a 2-minute argument or the full half hour.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Ted, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really have enjoyed this time together. We'll have links to the book, to the blog, everything in there, including our first conversation where we did much more of a deep dive into the blog and your journey as a grandfather. So people can check that out.
Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it. And stay well. And we'll talk again soon, I hope.
Thanks.